Day in Africa's calendar. In studio, still have Javas Bigambo, who's a governance expert, as well as Anne Jagi from Africa Rising. And Javas initially talked about the need to have strong institutions in Africa. And we talk about institutions, the first that crosses your mind or our minds is the African Union. For example, if you look at the talks that collapsed in the South Sudan peace talks that collapsed in Addis 2 days ago, it's IGAD that was mediating. And African Union seems not to take some sort of a central role there. Do you think they're a bit ineffective?
Yeah, because I would say, I think yes and no, because, but mostly because most of our leaders right now, especially the AU, are supposed to be in and also trying to be in solidarity with such a country which is going through those kind of acts. I think for me, I would clearly say they have failed in their work because they're supposed to condemn and also try and come out very strongly and fight even for them, even for the rights of the people. Because we've seen a lot of violations of human rights. Honestly, it is not even fair, even to those, because those are innocent lives that even we are losing. Countries like even Cameroon, like what I'm saying, I saw a video which was doing rounds, like one of the people from Cameroon actually shared with us, and it was so traumatizing. You see people being shot, you know, I mean, like they just parade them and then they start shooting. And these are military officers and all that. And now you imagine, is this a country or, I mean, where are we going as a country if I was also in that country? Extrajudicial killings, issues to do with the violations of human rights, issues to do with the African, the AU is supposed to be, or even the IGAD, you know. Those are some of the bodies or the agencies that are supposed to be to stand with at least the Africans when we have those issues. They need to voice over the concerns of this. Yeah, exactly.
And fulfill the dreams of the forefathers. Javas exactly. Of a peaceful continent.
Yeah.
Now, Javas, on the flip side, on the positive side, we've seen a lot of changes in leadership in Africa. For example, in South Africa, Zimbabwe, for example, Mugabe is now out of power. Botswana, they had a very peaceful transition in power. Ethiopia, I mean, there are a lot of examples in Africa. Do you think this perhaps shows some sort of a bright future for this continent?
I wouldn't say that the future is very bright, but it's very promising. Because there are sufficient examples. Given South Africa, you remember when there was a political impasse in the Gambia, ECOWAS stepped in, and we saw Yahya Jammeh get some, soft landing. When you see what continually happens in other countries, when you see what happened in Liberia, when Johnson Sirleaf was handing over power, it holds the great promise that if African leaders and citizens of the continent choose to take a firm and clear direction, Africa has got the great promise to rise and to become even just the best continent on earth. It is possible. So that when we have the African Union having the teeth to bite as ECOWAS, how it shepherds issues to do with even the oil-producing countries within that side of the peninsula, and how they work on the economic issues. Then on the African Union side here, and the East African community, we would not find issues happening in South Sudan the way they're happening today. We would not continually having the kind of conflict that Kenya has been having with Tanzania, etc., or Kenya with Uganda over Migingo, and such like things. So the promise is there. The only thing is that we need to find ourselves embraced yet again with that spirit that led our forebears to fight for Africa's independence. When I talked about people like the former leadership of Ghana, etc., when you look at Kwame Nkrumah, etc., when you look at Namibia and think of leaders such as Herman Andiba, Yaya Toivo, and how they sacrificed, went into prison, came out, they did not want to occupy high office just because they sacrificed for our nation. If we, in occupying various positions, as professionals, as political leaders, etc., would choose to put our country first, Africa has got the great potential to rise.
Yes, and just to make it practical for some of our viewers who don't know the landmass of Africa itself, this is a continent that is the size of the US, Europe, Argentina, China, and India combined. That's the landmass that Africa has. And Javas has already pointed out that, we don't have a problem of resources. So what do you think needs to be done to make sure that Africa succeeds? and gets to the level that everybody aspires to get to?
For me, I would advocate for good governance, and also we need to fight corruption, because corruption is one of the vices that is really killing Africa. So in terms of, and apparently the most corrupt, you know, like we are seeing our leaders, they are not even taking any action, not only in Kenya, even in other countries, because the other African countries have been trying to see, we have so, you know, like we said, Africa is so rich. It's true. Africa has got all the resources that we have. And that is why even we find most of the foreigners, even they just come to sort of like, okay, I would call them the colonialists, who already have discovered this a lot in Africa. Their resources are there. So, and if
it's fair to call them foreign investors for now.
Yeah, investors. I would call them investors, because even although some of the investors, like what we've seen, and this is some of the thing Africans Rising is even condemning. We've seen even most of them trying to pollute even the environment, which is something that we've also been trying to fight for, environmental justice. And now they are the same investors. Fine, we appreciate investors in our continent, but then again, they don't need to come and pollute this. So for me, I think, back to your question, we need to fight corruption. We need to have at least leaders who can be held accountable in terms of even, you know, accounting for all the... Yes.
I think you've delivered your point. Yeah. And I think when it comes to pollution itself, the government that is supposed to take care of that, not the foreign investors. Yeah. But at the same time, Javas, let me bring you back to the earlier conversation we had about aid. And you've pointed out one of Africa's economists, well-known economist, the Zambian lady, that is Dambisa Moyo, who even proposed that aid should at least be freezed for about 5 years. Africa alone receives about $50 billion every year through aid, but we're seeing this money don't get to the people on the ground. For example, this morning we had a conversation about the corruption level in Kenya alone, which contributes about, people are losing about 600 billion shillings every year.
In fact, if you were to ask common citizens in this country and tell them the truth about the kind of aid that comes into this country, whether it goes to matters, supposed to go to matters environment or health, they will be shocked. They would wonder, what are you talking about? Because their situation and their plight has remained the same decade after decade. Now, aid, in a way, can create the impression, a false impression, that it helps so much. This aid should actually be aided, should be put in such a manner that only helps or goes into certain, or channeled into certain areas for a certain period of time. I remember during the leadership of former president, retired President Moi, he decided, and actually for some time, Kenya did not receive much of foreign aid. And Kenya did not collapse. It tells you one thing, that if African countries choose to be blind a bit to dependency on aid, and use or utilize their own internal resources and work hard, fold their sleeves, it can be done. We can move forward. Look at what Chairman Mao Zedong did for China. Decided that China is not going to import anything from anywhere. Everything must be produced locally. Today, look at where China is. So it is possible. And I would agree with Dambisa Moyo that this aid that we receive, actually it is dysfunctional to a very great extent. We must not create the impression as African countries that except when we receive aid, we can't do much. And I like what President Kenyatta said some time back, that when it comes to recurrent expenditure in this country, it's not dependent on foreign aid. Then, if we were to try and take that direction as well, and say that, how about we channel or try to create our development expenditure dependent on our internal resources, so that dependence on foreign aid becomes limited. That is possible. But how do we move to that direction? Creating systems that have integrity cherished as a value, and respecting the values of good governance and leadership. We need to have Africa truly rising when we fix our security at the Horn of Africa and every part, so that we get to put at bay things like terrorism, etc. When, my brother Ibrahim, when we see Africans trying to brave the winds in the seas on boats to cross over to Europe,
that says a lot about Africa.
It tells you that they are sending a very sublime message, actually a very overt message about our continent, about their homeland. Really, do we hate our countries that much that we are willing to be devoured by sharks
Yeah.
to try and get to a land that is not even the promised one.
That shows the level of frustrations among the citizens. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Javas, thank you very much for your input. Javas Bigambo is a governance expert, as well as Anne Njagi from Africa Rising. Thank you very much, both of you, for your input on this show. And that brings us to the end of our program this morning. You've been watching the News Center right on here on KTN News. And earlier on a Twitter poll, we did ask you this: is the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission capable of dealing with corruption? 8% affirmed their confidence in the Eliud Bukala-led commission, and 92%, let me say a whopping 92%, feel the anti-graft body has failed in its mandate to deal with corruption. Unfortunately, we couldn't get time to go through some of your feedback there, but anyway, thanks for contributing, and let the conversation continue. I think it's good to see that, Kenyans are finally angry about this vice that has contributed, or, has seen Kenya lose about 600 billion Kenya shillings annually. And that brings us to the end of our program. Many thanks for watching. Bye-bye, and have a very good day.